April 7, 1942. Coral Sea. The rising sun streaked across the surface of the water like silver blades. On the deck of a Japanese aircraft carrier, an officer gazed at the horizon with restrained arrogance. A crooked smile. The smile of someone who believes nothing can stop him. He was reading the report he had captured weeks earlier. American planes, slow, vulnerable, poorly armed. The officer laughed. A short laugh. Dry. Out of contempt. In the background, radial engines roared as the Zeros took off in perfect synchrony. The Pacific sky seemed to belong to Japan. The war seemed decided. And the U.S., wounded after Pearl Harbor, seemed incapable of reacting. However, on that same day, in a small, hidden shed in San Diego, a group of exhausted engineers, test pilots, and military personnel scribbled on blackboards, redrew wings, and erased calculations with trembling hands. They didn't know they were about to create the weapon that would break the backbone of the Japanese Empire. And the Japanese officer who was laughing on deck. I had no idea that on that day I was witnessing the beginning of my own end. The secret plan began in an almost improvised way. Officially, it was called the Pacific Emergency Fighter Program, but inside the hangars it was simply the project nobody wants to touch. The proposal seemed absurd. To create an aircraft that combined speed, range, payload, and endurance sufficient to rival the Japanese Zero, an aircraft considered, until then, invincible. The Zero could turn at impossible angles, consume little fuel, and humiliate any Allied pilot. And what did the U.S. have? The clumsy Brewster Buffalo. And the F-4F Wildcat, robust, but inferior. The new fighter jet would need to be unlike anything that existed before. But how do you build something entirely new in the midst of a war? How do you reinvent aeronautical engineering under pressure, with limited resources, short time, and an advancing enemy fleet? The initial tests were a disaster. The initial prototype was slow, vibrated dangerously above 400 kilometers per hour, and suffered from instability in curves. The wing coating was cracking. The engine was overheating. There were problems with the landing gear, which collapsed frequently. An engineer wrote in an internal report, "If it depends on this project, we will lose the war." Another, more resigned one, "It seems to fly like a brick." The press never knew. The top brass never admitted it. But the secret plan was almost cancelled. Nevertheless, a small team persisted. Each night, they adjusted the curvature of the wings, rethought the cooling system, and redesigned the armament. It was a battle of millimeters, of blown fuses and silent sweat. And in that stuffy warehouse, amidst failures and frustrations, a new monster was beginning to take shape. No one imagined that this apparent failure carried the seeds of victory. The first real test took place over Guadalcanal. The prototype, now named F-6F Hellcat, was shipped in haste. The order was simple: to see if the plane would survive. He did not survive. In its first encounter with a group of Zeros, the Hellcat took direct hits. The pilot returned with difficulty, landing the plane in pieces. The accounts were humiliating. Zero is still superior in maneuverability. The Hellcat loses energy very quickly. It's not keeping pace with the rise of the Japanese. The enemy laughed. Japanese pilots commented that the Americans were trying to imitate without understanding. A captured Japanese report stated, "The new American fighter jet is just a crude copy. It remains easy prey." And for a brief moment, even within the American command itself, it seemed that they were right. The monster was still sleeping. Or worse, it didn't exist yet. The turning point began with a coincidence. During routine flight tests, a pilot noticed that the Hellcat, despite being slow in turns, maintained brutal stability in dives and vertical maneuvers. It was as tough as a tank. It had enough torque to get out of impossible situations. An engineer then suggested, "What if we don't try to compete with Zero in what he does best? What if we do the opposite?" The concept was simple and brilliant. Instead of trying to turn things around with Zero, the Hellcat was supposed to rely on power, not maneuverability. Instead of horizontal combat, he would engage in vertical combat. Instead of delicacy, I would use mechanical brutality. The Hellcat has been redesigned with Pratt & Whitney 2000 horsepower engine, reinforced structure capable of absorbing absurd impacts, 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, greater speed in diving, ease of mass production. And then, finally, a veteran pilot tested the concept. With altitude, energy, and controlled dive, the Hellcat hunted a Zero like a predator. Zero tried to turn the game around. The Hellcat simply dove, surfaced, and reappeared behind him like an inescapable metallic shadow. For the first time, Zero was not the owner of the sky. And at that moment, in that single experimental combat, the war changed without anyone noticing. The monster had awakened. When the Hellcat officially entered combat, the Japanese didn't understand what was happening. In Bougainville, Rabaul, Saipan, and Leyte, reports began to surface. New, extremely resilient enemy fighter jet. Machine guns with a devastating rate of fire. Impossible to knock down while diving. Energy attacks impossible to keep up with. The perception shifted from laughter to shock. The rate of fire of the 6 Browning .50 caliber rifles. 720 shots per minute each. It sounded like uninterrupted thunder, echoing across the open sea. A Japanese pilot wrote, "They shoot as if the sky had teeth." The statistics were terrifying. 5,163 aerial victories recorded. 307 Hellcats lost in combat. Slaughter ratio, 19-1. In some battles, 40-1. Japan, which had dominated the skies for 3 years, now faced a machine that. It was going up faster. He was diving faster. He was shooting harder. Resisted fatal damage. It was produced at an unmatched industrial pace. The Hellcat was more than just a fighter jet. It was a system of production, doctrine, and total war. The Zeros, once glorified, have become targets. And with each battle, the legend grew. The enemy, who had laughed at first, was now writing reports in an almost ritualistic tone. Fear the new American Wildcat. The Hellcat didn't just change the sky. It changed the logic of war. Japanese doctrine was based on veteran pilots, maneuverability, refined combat. The American doctrine, after Hellcat, became mass production, rational training, energy combat, total control of the sea through air superiority. While Japan was losing its best pilots, the U.S. was training hundreds of new aviators every month, all capable of fighting thanks to the simplicity and tolerance of the Hellcat. The Hellcat represented something bigger. The victory of adaptation over tradition, of pragmatism over ideology, of engineering over military romanticism. He was heavier, uglier, and more brutish. And that is precisely why he triumphed. An American commander summed it up. Zero was a work of art. The Hellcat was a winning machine. 3 years after that Japanese officer laughed on deck, American aircraft carriers sailed unopposed through the Pacific. The skies, once dominated by the rising sun, they now belonged to the deep roar of the Pratt & Whitney engines. And the laughter, that initial laugh, it disappeared. When the Japanese saw hundreds of Hellcats covering the Okinawan sky like a swarm of steel, they realized that the sound of laughter had been replaced by another sound, the thunder of defeat. Because every dive, every burst of the Browning .50, each shadow cast on the sea, it echoed the same simple truth. They laughed when they saw the prototype for the first time. They stopped laughing when they realized that monster, it's here to stay. The Hellcat was more than just a fighter jet. It was brutal proof that ingenuity, fueled by freedom, improvisation, and urgency, can turn weakness into a weapon, shame in victory, and despair in supremacy. And when it was all over, when the Pacific finally fell silent, only the final sound remained, deep and eternal, which marked the end of the Japanese empire in the skies. The thunder spoke, and the sky never belonged to them again.